Hello, saver. Whether you're saving for that trip to the tropics or saving for an emergency, now is the time to take advantage of Wells Fargo's savings options. Wells Fargo offers savings accounts that can help you save towards your goals. So, what are you saving for? Visit a Wells Fargo branch or wellsfargo.com/save to open a savings account today.
Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.
Hello, this is Ohavia Phillips.
And I'm Dennis Reed.
And as members of Charlotte's Black community, we're proud to call the Queen City home.
And with Charlotte Love Notes, we're sharing our love story and spotlighting the Black-owned businesses that make this city so special.
That's right, the restaurants, shops, and more that we love and express the craft and culture of Charlotte's Black community.
So head to charlottesgotalot.com to see our love notes and plan your trip.
And show your love to the community that inspires us.
Hello, saver. Whether you're saving for that trip to the tropics or saving for an emergency, now is the time to take advantage of Wells Fargo's savings options. Wells Fargo offers savings accounts that can help you save towards your goals. So, what are you saving for? Visit a Wells Fargo branch or wellsfargo.com/save to open a savings account today.
Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.
So our podcast is called Right and Wrong.
Are these your notes?
These
Are these your notes about what we're going to say?
Anything.
Nailed it.
It's the short answer.
So how many novels did you not finish?
Oh my God, so many.
It was perfect. What's she talking about? This is nonsense.
Ooh, a spicy question. I love it.
This is it, guys. The big secret to getting published is you have to write a good book.
We're brilliant. Let's do it.
Hello, and welcome back to the Right and Wrong podcast. We are continuing the team up with the RNA, as I am delighted to welcome back to the podcast one of this year's nominees for Agent of the Year, Hannah Schofield. Hi, Hannah. Welcome back.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me again. And I'm delighted to be here under such exciting circumstances.
Yeah, exactly. Congratulations on being nominated as Agent of the Year 2022. It must be a great feeling. Hi guys, Jamie from the future here. We actually recorded this before it was announced who the winners were, and Hannah did end up winning the RNA's Agent of the Year 2022. So huge congratulations to her.
Yes, it was such an enormous surprise because I only sold my first book less than 3 years ago, and I'd always thought I would love to win the RNA Agent of the Year one day in the future. And then so I got an email saying I would been nominated, and I was so over the moon excited. And then a week later, I got another email that said, "You've been shortlisted." And I just couldn't believe it. This was, a real career highlight. I'm so excited. Oh,
that's amazing. And I'm glad have you worked with the RNA sort of throughout your career?
Yes, I have. I did their in-person conference for the first time this summer, which was really exciting. And I actually got to meet some of my authors in person there for the first time, which was great. But previous to that, I'd done several of their online one-to-ones with aspiring authors or up-and-coming authors. So I've been sort of involved with the RNA for a while. And my colleague, the very wonderful Amanda Preston, also won Agent of the Year, I think 4 years ago. So she's always been very connected to the RNA. And luckily, I've been able to be as well.
Amazing. I mean, that it must be even more sort of validating and amazing being sort of tied in with the network already. Yes, definitely. I mean, the RNA are full of absolutely amazing people and amazing writers. And being able to meet them in person this summer was so wonderful. And then shortly afterwards to have been put forward for this award, I just felt utterly bowled over. It was really, amazing. And I'm so glad that such a prestigious trade body has recognized my love for and championing of romantic fiction. That feels great. Yeah, more power to romantic fiction. Exactly, yes. Now, of course, you've already been on the podcast. So anyone listening, if you want to hear more about Hannah's start in publishing and her journey to becoming an agent, as well as a sort of in-depth look at submissions and things like that, skip back a few episodes, you can find that. But let's just do a quick recap. you are part of the team over at LBA Books.
Yes.
And your list is adult fiction, but it's fairly eclectic within adult fiction.
It's very eclectic. I mean, so it's adult fiction with some adult nonfiction and some young adult fiction.
Okay.
So it's a real mix. And someone the other day asked me to sort of define my list in a few words. And the only defining factor, I think, is things that I like.
Excellent.
Which is
very helpful.
Difficult to pitch. But I think in general, I love stories about people and relationships and love, of course. And that always cuts through, regardless of the genre. So a very broad strokes example is the two most recent book deals that I announced. One of them was a young adult fantasy romance, and the other was a serious non-fiction history of disability in Britain, which sounds like they're completely different.
Yeah.
And they are, but they both really tap into human stories and what it's like to be a person. And those are the sorts of things that really capture me. I just need that emotional investment, regardless of genre, regardless of fiction or non-fiction. That's really what I'm looking for, to feel something.
Yes. Yeah. I guess then it might be easier in some ways to ask. I mean, that was actually very helpful. And it does, even though you described those two recent book signings and they sound very far away, but then when you put it in the context of what I'm looking for, something that is relatable sort of human experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, would it be easier to ask, what don't you represent?
Maybe, actually, yes. I think that is easier because I don't represent literary fiction. That, if you want to win the Booker Prize, more power to you. That's not the sort of books that I gravitate towards. And I also do most genres of commercial fiction, but I don't really do sci-fi or like military thriller or sort of action adventure style books. Like I do some thriller, but it tends to be sort of more psychological rather than adventure. But otherwise, I always describe myself as rather genre agnostic, and I like to be surprised. So I try not to say never to anything. I thought I would never do any fantasy, and then I read some fantasy, and I was like, "This is amazing! I must do it." So yeah, I just love to be surprised and engaged, regardless of the sort of fiction or non-fiction that it is.
Okay, amazing. You do young adult, but you don't go younger.
No, I've done some for co-agenting opportunities, i.e. I have sold the UK rights for an American agent, but I'm not currently looking for anything younger than YA for my primary list. Okay,
so YA and up. And I mean, speaking of international agents, that sounded weirdly like a sort of James Bond kind of thing. Speaking of international publishing, we recently had the Frankfurt Book Fair. It was not long ago. Did you attend?
I didn't, actually. I have been in the past, and it was an incredibly overwhelming experience. Some good, some bad. But no, I didn't attend this year. So I'm currently checking in with my translation rights partners to see how they got on at the fair and what deals might be forthcoming after all their meetings.
I was going to ask, it's maybe one of the biggest international sort of publishing events in the calendar.
Yeah.
I imagine it's one of the best also opportunities to sort of learn about foreign markets and what is selling across the world in many ways. Yeah,
totally. So as you might remember from the previous podcast, my first full-time job in publishing was for a scouting agency who work for foreign publishers as a consultant to find the best books in English to get them to buy it for translation. So when I attended the Frankfurt Book Fair, I was there for a scouting capacity, and that taught me so much about what foreign publishers look for, what they value, what they get excited about, how to get them excited about projects. And I always bring those learnings into when I'm thinking about signing an author or when I'm going out with a new submission, I always think about, okay, what's the foreign potential for this? How would I pitch it internationally? Could I see Germany, France, Italy, etc., getting excited about this? Like, I always factor that in to my thinking when I'm planning submissions or signing authors.
Yeah. And I mean, let's take those countries used as an example. Are there sort of, is it the same big genres that dominate the charts there as it is in the UK, or is it wildly different?
I wouldn't say it's wildly different, but every territory is different and have different, I guess, values and focuses based on their market. I also grew up in Luxembourg, so I grew up around people from lots of different nationalities. So I always think I got a slight insider track into, what might make a French reader tick. I mean,
okay,
perhaps. I like to think that anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's really important to keep on top of international trends as well as national trends, because yes, sometimes they are the same. I mean, Richard Osman obviously is doing amazing things all over the planet. But some things work really well in Britain and not elsewhere, and some things work really well elsewhere and not in Britain. Lucinda Riley, for example, was a huge bestseller in the Netherlands and Germany, I think long before she hit the charts in the UK, just because their market was sort of ahead of ours for that sort of fiction. So
interesting.
Yeah.
And of course, lots of book deals and announcements come out in and around Frankfurt. We chatted about this on email briefly, specifically when the huge 7-figure deals come out.
Yes.
And you've been thinking about that a lot, you mentioned.
Yes, because I too had an exciting Frankfurt announcement that was coming out, which was the fantasy romance. And I was super excited for that to be announced, but I still got in my head the previous week when I was seeing all of these other massive deals being thinking, oh no, and why aren't I doing those deals? Why isn't my authors on those deals? And I think if you're an agent or if you're an author, it's a really tough time of year because it feels like a zero-sum game in which all of these huge deals and huge authors announcements come out, and you think, well, what about me? What about my books?
Yeah.
And that is tough, but it's also an illusion. A lot of those deals have been done months before, and just kept the news back to announce at the most buzzy time of year. So I think that's worth remembering. It's not just that, for example, if you're on submission to publishers at the moment, it's not that publishers aren't reading your books because they're too busy buying these other giant books. That's probably not the case. They probably bought that giant book 6 months ago and just didn't announce it till now. But it is a time of year which I think comparison culture can get really intense. So I had to really take a step back and be like, okay, I know everything's fine. I'm just in my head about this. It's all an illusion. But it is tough. And I think particularly for nervous writers, nervous agents, it can be a quite confronting experience to be faced with so much success that isn't yours.
Yes.
But it's not a zero-sum game. It is not a zero-sum game.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the other thing to remember, and this is especially for authors, and is that you don't hear about all of the authors and agents who the publishers aren't signing, and you rarely see a headline that'll read author signs 5-figure deal, which is much more common than 6 or 7 figure.
Definitely. And I think obviously, that makes sense from a early marketing perspective, that a publisher wants to be more excited about something they've paid more money for so that they can make their money back, essentially. But also that they're always the outliers. Sometimes books don't even get a bookseller announcement. They'll be announced on Twitter or on another social platform, but that doesn't mean they're not going to do well. So it's all smoke and mirrors, kind of.
Kind of, but obviously
there's more to the puzzle, I think, than just big deals mean big success. Sometimes they do, but sometimes smaller deals mean big success as well.
Yes, exactly. And am I right in thinking the announcement you're talking about is B. Fitzgerald's
It is.
Girl Goddess Queen?
Yes.
Which feeds really nicely into my next question, because I have heard that and I'm always interested to see what the trends are, what's becoming popular and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard a lot of buzz about romantasy as the next big thing. And obviously, Girl Goddess Queen falls perfectly into that category. Do you think that is something that is going to be very popular in the next sort of year or so?
I think so. I mean, it's always been very popular, certainly in the last few years anyway, when I've been aware of it, in independent publishing, like self-publishing. And I think because it's had so much success in that sphere, publishers are taking notice. And obviously the rise of book talk has been hugely influential in this, where readers sort of congregate and get excited about all their favorite ships in romantasy. So I think it's one of those things which has been really reader-led in a very exciting way, because TikTok is peer-to-peer recommendations in a way that I feel that the industry hasn't seen on that scale for a long time. So that's really cool, in my opinion. And if publishers are taking notice, fantastic. Give those readers more to digest, I say.
Yeah. And obviously TikTok as well is like, it's almost like a way to tap into an entire generation.
Yes.
Which is, as an advertising opportunity, an incredible thing to have, very valuable.
Definitely.
Other than romantasy, the next big thing, are there any other sort of genres or trends that you could see on the rise in the next year or so?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. It's not the first time I've been asked, actually. And I kind of get I don't know, I stress out about the trends question, because how can I predict the trends? I wish I could. I wish I knew exactly what was going to sell. But I think things that we've been seeing a lot of doing really well, cutting through in terms of book deals, is cozy crime. Again, the Richard Osman effect, but there's been some other really cool cozy crime things coming through. I think rom-com's still doing really well, but at the moment we're looking for rom-com plus, I would say. So I was talking to an editor the other day who'd acquired a heist rom-com, which I think is fantastic, where it hits all the beats of a rom-com, but it's also got that other kind of genre spin on it. And I think in a market that's moving towards saturation, as everything does when it gets popular, having that extra something is really helpful to stand out from the crowd. So that would probably be my romantasy, cozy crime, rom-com plus.
Okay,
that's what I'm looking for, or that's what people are looking for.
Yeah. Rom-com with a side of this. Rom-com set in this thing. Okay.
Fargo, the new virtual assistant from Wells Fargo, makes banking faster and easier. Like this.
Fargo, what's my checking account routing number?
And this.
Fargo, turn off my debit card.
And this.
Fargo, what did I spend on groceries last month?
And that's just the beginning. Do you, Fargo? You can. In the Wells Fargo mobile app. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/getfargo.
Terms and conditions apply. Your mobile carrier's availability and message and data rates may apply. Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.
Hello, saver. Whether you're saving for that trip to the tropics or saving for an emergency, now is the time to take advantage of Wells Fargo's savings options. Wells Fargo offers savings accounts that can help you save towards your goals. So, what are you saving for? Visit a Wells Fargo branch or wellsfargo.com/save to open a savings account today.
Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.
Yes.
Well, that's really interesting and great for romance as a genre, to have things like romantasy becoming very big and also rom-com plus becoming like a big thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for romance, I think it's really exciting that there is so much diversity within the genre, that there are loads of ways to write love stories. There are loads of ways to write romantic fiction, whether that's historical or contemporary or straight or queer. And I love that it has so much opportunity within that genre to do lots of different things. So I think people mashing up genres, whether that's fantasy romance or heist romance. That's really exciting.
Heist romance.
Maybe that's going to be the next thing. I mean, I love books about con women. And mostly I've read books about con women in thriller, like in thriller and suspense. And so if that were combined with rom-com, another of my favorite genres, maybe that would be my favorite mashup. Who knows?
Heist is forever tainted for me as a genre after I saw the Rick and Morty episode about heists.
Oh.
And now I can never take heists seriously again.
I don't think I will, because I love a heist. So I'll have to keep that pure.
I mean, I still love, something like Ocean's 11. I still love a classic heist. Let's get back on track. Okay, so beyond those sort of popular genres, trends that are maybe coming into fashion, it's very hard to keep up with trends though, because especially with the rate of publishing, by the time you have tried to see a trend, write a trend, get an agent has put that to the publisher, that trend might not be a thing anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think I do caution against two things. Number one, writing for trends, because by the time your book comes out, that trend might be over, or people are like, oh, I'm so bored of that trend now. And thing number two is cautioning against not thinking about trends at all. I think particularly for commercial fiction, you have to have an eye on the market, because if you don't fit into a category for commercial fiction, it's very, very difficult to find a publisher, because there's not like a designated space for you at the moment. That's not to say there wouldn't be in the future. So, write what you love, keep on your passion project, but also think about, if you want to have writing as a career, what the market is looking for. The market dictates. But.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I think that's the same with all kind of creative outlets and disciplines. If you look at television, if you look at movies, if you look at video games, it's the key to success often is something sort of familiar, recognizable, yet different.
Yes, definitely. So a spin on an established trope or an established classic, or a new way of looking at a story structure that people already like. I think that is often the way to have that great success and have that cut through, is give people something which is familiar enough that they sort of feel comfortable in the world that you're building, different enough that it stands out as your project, as your book. Yeah.
As someone who's a very big fantasy reader, I find that a lot when I try and get people who are not big fantasy readers into fantasy, and I'll read a page of seeming nonsense, but I understand the sort of the tropes and the meta of how fantasy is constructed and written. And I read a lot of hard fantasy as well, so I understand rule structures and things.
Right.
Whereas someone who's not experienced in fantasy will open it and just see page of, it's like, well, half the words here are gobbledygook. And I'm like, yeah, but you'll find out what that is later on and it'll all make sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's one of the greatly fun things about reading, particularly if you are specifically in like one genre, one fandom, is that there are all these kind of inside jokes and inside information that the more you're immersed, the more you understand. Like that's really cool. And then also, if you're a creator, the more you understand, the more you can riff off those established tropes to create something new.
Yeah. I've some of my friends are very into board games, and it's a weird comparison, but they do, when they get a new board game or they'll learn a new board game and they'll sit down, and because their knowledge of board games is so extensive, they'll sit down with this, open it up, read the rules and go, okay, so that's like Monopoly crossed with Catan, so that's that rule system from that. Then they'll just chuck the rules away and they'll be like, okay, I understand. Because they're all formed around this like pre-established understanding of these kind of rules of the genre, as it were.
Yeah, definitely. And one project that I've been working on, which I won't say too much about yet, but is doing exactly that. It's taking established tropes of the genre and playing with them in a really fun way. So I think it will appeal to both genre fans and also maybe people who wouldn't say that they were a fan of that particular genre, but it's like a gateway drug, if you want to give the metaphor. Yeah, it's like something that's opening a door to a new reader.
Yes, very much like I think Game of Thrones acted that way.
Totally.
To
yeah,
a
absolutely.
lot of people getting them into fantasy.
And for me, it was YA fantasy that got me into reading Game of Thrones, in fact.
Interesting.
I had read a few YA fantasies and been really excited about them. And then I sort of plucked up the courage after that to try something more epic, which is not something that's kind of my core genre, my core reading, but it was, from starting somewhere which felt more accessible because I already read YA. So YA fantasy, I could recognize sort of YA conventions within the fantasy world, and then moving on to fantasy from there.
That really does seem like a gateway drug, though. YA fantasy into Game of Thrones is like a hard drug.
Yes. I didn't finish the book series. I did finish the TV series, much to my distress, I guess. But
it was good until the end.
Quite, really, yes.
Let's before we talk too long about Game of Thrones and fantasy, which I could talk about all day. Let's talk about all of the writers out there, whether they're looking at trends, whether they have something that's currently on trend and they really want to get it out. Lots of people are submitting to agents right now, and I'm sure you know this. I don't need to tell you this. You probably get 1 million submissions a day. What do you think authors can do to really make their submissions stand out?
Great question, because it is hard. I think it's worth being honest about the fact that it is hard, and there's lots of people who are searching for representation. So you're in a big pile. But I think two things. One, well, I think many things, but the two main things I would say here is good writing always cuts through. Even like you can tell, even if I'm feeling a bit tired, if I'm feeling a bit hungry, if I read a submission where it's got that aha moment, that will make me sit up straight and notice. And the second thing is getting me there. So making sure I want to turn to your pages immediately, i.e. having a really strong query letter, and particularly the two things that that seems to be my thing today. The two things that stick out to me tend to be really great comparison titles. So perhaps something that I've talked about being one of my favorite books, or an X meets Y, which is like quite unusual, which makes me intrigued, and a very strong one-line pitch. And I know everyone hears about this all the time, but it's true, because publishers say to me, unless you can pitch it in a sentence, I can't buy it because I can't get it past my sales team. So that's what I'm thinking about. So I'm thinking about that when looking at submissions to me. Could I pitch this in a sentence? If not, what would I need to change about the project in order to pitch it in a sentence? So if the author has done some of that thinking and pitching for me, I'm already going to be more excited because I think, I could sell this. And that at the core is what agents are looking for. Yes, I definitely look for projects that I'm going to fall in love with the voice and be really excited about the story, but also I need to have projects that I'm going to be able to sell. That's my job, to sell your books.
Yeah. So strong comparison titles, a very good sort of one-line pitch, almost you want as close to market ready pitch as it can be, right? Because presumably, I mean, if you look at it through the lens of an agent could, in theory, take on any client. It's just about the amount of work it would potentially take to get that to a market ready point. I'm ignoring any kind of creative objections from the client here. But
well, I guess that's kind of my job too, not to ignore all of creative
compromise.
But compromise, exactly. So I think it's much easier to quote unquote fix the plot of something than it is the essential hook of the story or the writing. So if I find something where I think, okay, there's a real kernel of something awesome here and the writing's really strong, but I'm not quite convinced by the story structure yet, that would be a conversation I'd have with the author. And I've done that before, where I've written back on something that I've called in the full manuscript and said, listen, I think this, and this is fantastic. I love your writing, but I think we would need to do this editorial shift before I'd feel confident about selling it. What do you think? And, a writer is well within their rights at that point to say, that doesn't align with my vision. Thank you so much. Goodbye. But also that's an opportunity if they want to collaborate. And I'm very collaborative with my authors. I love editing. I find it extremely fun. And it's something I'm always kind of hoping to get into the weeds with them, to be able to build something together that is market ready. I don't expect people to send me something that's like perfect as it is straight to my inbox. Great if they do, but that's not what I expect.
Okay, so it's a sort of it's easier to redecorate than to be changing the foundations of the building.
Yeah, that's probably a good way of putting it.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And the way that kind of manifests within the submission package is that the sort of the one-line pitch, the synopsis, and obviously the writing itself comes into it, the voice and that. But the reason the one-line pitch and the synopsis are important is because it shows you what the foundations are, what the kind of concept is that you're working with.
Exactly. And I know writers get quite stressed about synopses, like how do you fit your whole book into just a couple of pages? But what I'm looking for there is essentially, does this person understand story structure within the genre that they're writing? And if they do, great. And if I don't think they do, can I fix it or not? That's what I'm looking for in a synopsis.
Yeah, that makes sense. And here's a trickier question. Can you remember, and this is going to be super subjective, of course, as most things are in this kind of area, but can you remember what was maybe the best or maybe most striking submission that you've ever had?
Ooh. Oh my goodness, that's a really difficult question because I've signed most of my clients from the slush pile, as it were. So all of those really cut through. I suppose, one example that stood out to me personally was a book which is now called Definitely Fine by Amy Lavelle, who was the first client that I ever signed in collaboration with my colleague. And the main character was called Hannah. And there were just a few sort of weird coincidences about this Hannah and me that I was like, okay, I'm intrigued by this. Let me have a look. And I absolutely fell for this book. And that was the reason that Amy Lavelle became my first official client. But that was something that stood out immediately. It was like, weird coincidence here.
Yeah.
But it was like weird. It was weird, but that was fine. It wasn't like, oh, this author has done something quite creepy for me specifically. It wasn't that kind of query.
Yeah. So what you're saying is don't submit something where they've written you as the main character.
Please do not. I had one person who had written a book and they were like, oh, the literary agent in it is called Hannah. And I was like, oh, thanks. Why though?
That is unusual. Also unusual to write a book that involves literary agents, I think.
Yes, indeed. I recently read, well, not that recently actually, but one of the books I read in the summer was the new Emily Henry, Book Lovers, which I love Emily Henry. I'm a huge fan, but I found it so stressful to have the main character be a literary agent. I just couldn't escape into the world. I was like, I don't want this in my reading. I want something else, not my own job.
Oh, was it an accurate portrayal as well?
No. And I have many thoughts about that too. Or at least not accurate to my experience.
Okay. Well, before we get on to the final question, which you've already answered, but we'll check in there and see what's going on. It is November 2022. You are open to submissions.
I'm not currently, but I will be probably in a month's time.
Okay.
That's just because of my own timekeeping. I had to, because I hate it when I don't have time to reply to people. So I just needed to close down for a few weeks. I will be back soon by the end of the year, for sure. So
December, January, we're looking at for opening subs. Yes. Okay. And your list is, I mean, as we've discussed, eclectic, a wide range of things. But I have followed you on Twitter long enough to know that you are someone who often likes to chase a very specific thing. Are there any stories or characters or settings that you're really hunting down at the moment?
Oh, honestly, I'm really in the mood for a great thriller or suspense novel. I've got a really robust camp of romantic fiction authors in my stable, to mix a metaphor again. But I haven't found a thriller in a long time that I've been super excited about. So, if you've got anti-heroines with a righteous cause, send them to me. Okay. I want to read them. And what else? I think also I'd love to find something in the historical space. I haven't worked on one in a while, and that's one of my loves as well, because the setting can be so rich. I was talking to an editor the other day who had just acquired a historical novel set in Italy, and I thought that was really fun because so many historical fiction I have read has been set in Britain or in America, and I love to find something that is outside of those places to teach me more about history across the world.
Oh, very cool. Okay, well, that's useful, I think, for people submitting. Hopefully some people might jump up at that and think, oh, now I can wait for Hannah's subs to open and then send that over to her.
Yes, I love con women.
Love con women, that's it. And that brings us to what would be the final question, but you have already said what you would take to the desert island, and that is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall.
Yes.
Is that still the book that you would take?
I think so. And if I remember rightly, my alternate was Eligible by Curtis Sittenfeld.
Yes, suggested by your husband.
Suggested by my husband. Indeed. Well, those two books remain the two books that I have read the most. I haven't reread Tenant this year, but I have reread Eligible this year. So I think that still feels right.
Okay, great. It's nice that you have stuck with those, and that I would honestly, my one would change probably every week, maybe every day.
I have lots of favorites. I do have lots of favorite books, but I think those two have stood the test of time.
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, they are classics in many ways. Well, thanks for coming back on and chatting about everything that's going on with you. Congratulations and good luck with the Agent of the Year nomination.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much. And I really appreciate you inviting me back. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, it's always a pleasure having you. And for anyone listening, if you want to keep up with what Hannah is doing, you can follow her on Twitter at Han Schofield. That's HANN Schofield. Check out more about the agency and submissions and how that all works at the LBA website. And if you are going to submit, make sure that the submissions are open for whichever agent it is and that you follow all of the guidelines. To make sure you don't miss an episode of this podcast, you can follow us on Twitter at Right and Wrong UK or on Instagram and TikTok at Right and Wrong Podcast. Thanks again to Hannah, and thanks to everyone listening. We'll catch you in the next episode.
Fargo, the new virtual assistant from Wells Fargo, makes banking faster and easier. Like this.
Fargo, what's my checking account routing number?
And this.
Fargo, turn off my debit card.
And this.
Fargo, what did I spend on groceries last month?
And that's just the beginning. Do you, Fargo? You can. In the Wells Fargo mobile app. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/getfargo.
Terms and conditions apply. Your mobile carrier's availability and message and data rates may apply. Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.